You are listening to the Baobab Project. Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us under the Baobab tree from wherever you are in the world today. We are joining you from Halifax, Nova Scotia. We've got so much to explore, from culture to lifestyle to health, relationships, education, and so much more. Now over to our podcast host for today.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Baobab Project. Today's episode, So You Want to Help. Let's talk about being an ally. With us today, I have Nilma, August, Alyssa, and they're coming from varying perspectives, context, and I'm hoping today that they will share this rich and deep perspective of allyship from their own context with the MSVU community. I'm the Black Student Support Office advisor, and I've been doing this podcast for coming close to a year now. I'm really excited to have with me my co-host today, Stephanie Hughes. So Stephanie, would you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Steph Hughes. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm here because I'm doing my master's currently in the lifelong learning program at MSVU. I got involved with the Baobab project basically as a placement for my practicum work. And so part of what we do as a team is we pitch ideas for content, and then we workshop those ideas and do some of the work to make hopefully really fabulous conversations happen. I wanted to talk about allyship and what it means to be an ally for my own benefit in a way, as I'm a white person, I'm a white settler. My ancestors come mostly from Wales and Ireland and Scotland. I'm a cisgendered woman. I feel like I have a lot of privilege in my life, and I'm interested in learning about how people from all different backgrounds and walks of life can come together to create positive changes. So that's some of the background around how this idea got pitched. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And I think we want to do a round of intros.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just call on some of the names, and hopefully we'll have folks being able to talk about their own context in terms of your name, if you want to talk about your program that you're in. But more so, I'm interested in what area did you come from that is affected by advocacy and allyship. So if you can share some of that as well, that would be key to this discussion. So I'll start with Nilma. Could you just share with us, please? Introduce yourself.
Okay, hi everybody. My name is Namal Kafur. I am in my final year taking a communications major and a Canadian studies minor. I'm also the vice president of communications for the Student Union. I think that for this podcast, I would be, I'm a Black Nigerian, I'm a Nigerian woman. And so I'm hoping to bring some of that perspective of being a Black person in Canada while not necessarily being Black back home, just being just me back home. So I'm hoping to bring that perspective to this podcast.
Thanks, Nilma. And August?
Hello. So I'm August. I'm the queer representative for the Mount Student Union, and I'm also a pretty good disability advocate for the union because I do believe I'm one of the only physically disabled. I use they, he pronouns, and my experiences with allyship and advocacy is I am a transgender, queer, and disabled person at the Mount, and I feel like all of those places, while they intersect quite a bit, they require a lot of personal advocacy, and I like the fact that I am in 3 different groups that can do so. I'm also a sociology major, and I like to focus on social work aspects.
Thanks, August. And Alyssa?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Alyssa McIntyre, and I have mixed ancestry. So I have Scottish roots along with Anishinaabe. So I'm from Georgina Island First Nation on Lake Simcoe in Ontario. Although I didn't grow up within my community, and I grew up in Collingwood, Ontario. And so at the Mount, I'm the Indigenous Student Advisor at the Indigenous Student Center. And I'm also taking applied human nutrition as well. And so a lot of my role at the center is advocacy work. And so helping support Indigenous students at the Mount in whatever way, shape, or form that looks like. Yeah, and so I'm excited to bring my perspectives around mixed ancestry and kind of floating a little bit into worlds, so to speak, to talk a little bit about my perspective on what it means to be an ally and allyship.
Thanks so much, Alyssa. And although Leah is not on the panel today, she's still in our presence. And I just want to take this opportunity for Leah to say hi. Leah, you want to unmute and say hi to us?
Hi, everybody. Interested in this discussion as well. Always looking to be a better part of society, a more functional and more contributive part of society. So it's nice to hear from you all and virtually meet you all.
Thank you. And yes, it is indeed nice to hear these perspectives that you've already discussed. Just a reminder, you're on the Baobab tree, and today our discussion is around allyship, and the podcast name is So You Want to Help. Let's talk about being an ally. I'm going to ask these questions in no order, and I hope that how we move forward is that you'll be able to either add to what the next person has said, because I think there'll be some similarities. There might be some similarities in our experiences. So if there's an opportunity to add to what someone else has said, that would be great. I'd encourage you to do so. But I'll give everyone an opportunity to really talk about what allyship looks like in their own context. I'll ask questions, and my co-host is here ready to ask some questions as well. There'll be no trick questions. All we need to know is your experiences. So I'll start with August. And our first question would be, since we're talking about allyship, which might not be a familiar concept to all of our listeners, what does allyship mean to you?
So to me, allyship really means is that you are doing everything you can to support and provide almost like safety, because I feel like for a lot of us, like for disabled, trans, for queer, is our lives are at a little bit of a risk in very different situations. There are always barriers in the world, especially for trans and queer nowadays. And I feel like allyship, it's the best way to provide that is to lend a hand, it's to listen to us, it's to spread word of like what the issues are, it's to petition government, it's to make sure that what we need is being met. And the fact that a lot of us are already saying what we need, the best thing to do is to raise our voices.
That's very well put. Alyssa, can you jump in and give us a definition or an explanation of what allyship means to you, please?
Yeah, definitely. To me, I would define an ally as a person who, and again, I'm definitely building upon what August was just saying, but who recognizes and leverages their positionality. So, their power and privilege in whatever ways, shapes, or forms that looks like, to take action against oppression or discrimination, and to act in solidarity with a person or a group. And fundamentally, I think that being an ally is rooted in having an understanding that every human being deserves to live and love equally. And to advocate, to amplify the fact that it's a verb as well. So constant action that's focused more on consistency rather than perfection. I think showing up is a big part of that.
Thanks, Alyssa. And Nilma, can you jump in and add to that?
Yes, I really like the word that Alyssa used where she said it's to leverage your positionality. So I just Googled what ally means, and from Merriam-Webster dictionary, it just says it means to join yourself with another person or group in order to give or get support. And I really think that that's what an ally is. It's somebody that recognizes that their own privilege can be used to assist another group that probably would be underprivileged or underrepresented if they don't have additional voices to back up their, social justice issues in this case.
That's really a really good addition. I just want to pick up on something that August mentioned. She spoke of the intersectionality. I thought that was key to this explanation or discussion on allyship. You all did present some key points, but I want to point out this notion of intersectionality. And I think this concept should be front and center in how we define or refer to allyship and allies. Also, there's this idea of the power dynamics and privilege and these kinds of things that comes to the picture of allyship. And yes, I do understand Webster is a well-known guy around the world. We take his word as it is written in stone, but in reality, our lived experiences says something else. And so when we think of allyship on the ground, we also have to think of these additional pieces of what it looks like or what it means to us as those who are stakeholders in this ally or allyship relationship. I'm going to pass the next question over to my co-host, Stephanie.
Great. Thanks so much, you guys. So I guess speaking from your various lenses and experiences, which you've just kind of detailed for us, which is really wonderful, maybe I'll start with Alyssa, if that's cool with you, Alyssa. What are some of the ways that you think allies can fit into community work? What role do you think that allies should play when getting engaged in community work?
Oh my goodness, I think that there's so many ways, shapes, and forms that this looks like. And I think first and foremost, it's really important to do a deep dive in terms of your own place-based history and understanding, because white supremacy impacts our bodies in very substantial ways. And so I think that there's a lot of traumas that live within that, that kind of override the way that we show up or fear of showing up. So I think a lot of the time we get in our own way out of fear of misstepping or saying the wrong thing, being tone deaf or ignorant, when in reality, we're all human beings and we hold unconscious biases, and we will misstep and say the wrong thing and be tone deaf. And it's about how you rectify that, I think, and that's kind of where the teaching is. So in allowing fear or shame to kind of take over, I think it's really important to sit with that and examine, where exactly you're feeling that, like where that happens in the body, and the sensations that come up. And then you have a better understanding of moving forward and helping to support other people in groups. I think that that's a starting point. And then you can begin to educate yourself on those realities coming from the voices of these particular people that are experiencing it. So a lot of the time, I think that can be amplification in whatever sphere of change. So whether that is on a personal level within your social circles or having tough conversations with family, that can be in a structural sense, in a workplace. If you see that somebody offered a good idea in a meeting that was overlooked, you can amplify what that person is saying. You can show up as a physical body at community events or protests, whatever that looks like. That can simply be being a support for a friend who's actively experiencing this. So being an ear or helping to support in other ways, whether that is helping support in terms of like self-care for people that are working on the front lines, providing your time. There's really so many ways that allyship looks like, and I think that all of the levels of change are equally important. So kind of like how the microcosm is the macro and vice versa. So everything that we do, even on the smallest scale, influences our reality on larger scales. I hope that that was cohesive.
Very much so. Yeah, that's a wonderful starting place.
Absolutely.
Also, I like how you emphasized in your answer to our first question, consistency over perfection, right? Because it is so easy to feel anxious stepping in or trying to contribute when you're fearful about possibly being misread or doing harm or whatever, and it stops a lot of people, you know. So I appreciate that. Let's go over to you. August, how have you maybe worked with allies or worked as an ally in some of this community work? What could you add to that answer about how allies fit in?
I think the biggest part with allies and community work is, especially with disability, is to make sure that you're working within your ability. Because I think, especially with disability, a lot of it is stigmatized terms like, oh, I can't see your disability. That doesn't mean they're not disabled. So if you're working within your ability to help, as Alyssa said, amplify us, I think that helps a lot. And I do a lot of my advocacy work online because I do have a bit of a Twitter presence. And like simply retweeting something, tweeting at like officials, doing something that will like amplify the issue does so much. And I do believe that it starts with amplification, because the conversation does, if no one's seeing us, it will end there. It's just going to be us talking at a wall. So the biggest part of allyship is making sure we're being heard. And in the community, it's not just like in person, because especially with the pandemic, not everyone can be in person. So it's taking every avenue to make sure that you're being accountable, that you're being helpful in amplification, and that you are making sure the conversation isn't ending.
Thanks so much. Oh, August, if I might ask you to elaborate a bit more on working within your ability. I think this sounds so interesting, and just for our audience to understand, whose abilities are you talking about, and what does it look like when you say working within your own ability?
What I mean by this is, so often you'll see what's put in the media. It's like people building houses for certain things, or doing these big events that require a lot of physical effort or a lot of mental effort or exhaustion. And the big thing is, we don't want our cause to hurt you. Without our allies, we don't have a proper cause because no one's listening. So if you're being injured, or if you're going beyond your ability, we're not being allies to you. So we really need to work together to boost each other without hurting each other.
Thanks so much. That was nice and clear.
It was.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So I guess same question to you, Noma, in terms of how allies have fit into the work that you've done on campus in the community in Canada or Nigeria.
Okay, so I think that there are a few things that I would say makes like a few ways that you can be an ally, and a few ways that I have been an ally in the past. So one of the first things is to speak up in your own social circles. So, for example, one of the things, I remember that one of the causes that I had really taken to heart was there was a period where there was a lot of issues around the way the government treated or treats Indigenous people. And so one of the ways that you can, be an ally is to speak up in your own social circle. So if someone is saying something demeaning or that's just not right or is outright harmful, even if the member of the community is not present, then you want to speak up in your social circle and say, no, that word is harmful, or that word is not a good word to use. Just because the person isn't here doesn't mean that you can say that. Another way that I think that is a way to be an ally is to center other people's voices. So rather than say, I think or I believe, you could find what other people that are experiencing the marginalization are feeling or are posting, and possibly repost those type of things. So for example, one good example I remember was at the beginning of the pandemic, where we had Black Lives Matter just like explode. I remember that Melissa Gates, what she did was she gave her Instagram page to, I don't remember who she did, but she gave her Instagram page to a Black woman who used the Melissa Gates reach to, reach people and just really talk about the issues around Black Lives Matter. So that was one way that I've seen someone practically center other people's voices. Another thing that I think people can do is to sponsor the movement. So one way I've done it is I bought this pin. That's like there's like a red dress pin. So when you do things like that, the money is going directly to the community. And we try not to think too much about what are they using the money for? What do you use money for? What does it matter? It's going back into the community. So those are some of the ways that I think that you can be an ally. And I also think that you should also find practical ways of being an ally, because sometimes I think that we're just in the heat of the moment, going off what is trending on Twitter, on Instagram, and then after that we forget and go back to our own little safe bubbles. But then these people are still experiencing the marginalization and the harm that is being caused. So I think that practical ways, we also need to find practical ways, for example, sponsorship, speaking in your own social circles and centering other voices. Those are some practical ways I think that you want to be an ally, because we don't just want to be what is the word, performative about being an ally.
Thanks so much, Naoma. So, Stephanie, what I'm getting here, I heard Naoma's response here, and she's saying allyship is not a 9-to-5 job.
Mm-hmm.
Did you get that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's something that you sign up for this responsibility, and you have to be committed, if I'm getting what Naoma is saying, to the point where she's demonstrating the fact that money is something that everybody wants to hold on to, and they want to know where the money is being spent. She's not saying that you just gave your money away without care, but knowing that if you purchase a specific item in her context, you're supporting the community. That is enough for her to know that she's practically and taking action to support the community in one way or the other. So I really love Naoma's explanation there. Got any other comments on that?
Yeah, I really appreciated everyone's responses. I like, it's nice to hear the emphasis on speaking up in your own circles, regardless of who else is around, because that's kind of working within the world that you already occupy, in order to cut into, possibly discriminatory attitudes. And it feels maybe small, like it feels like maybe a small thing. So it's nice to hear. It's nice to hear that that's a valuable way of contributing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess a bit of a further question on this is, there's been some emphasis on kind of doing some reflective work. Amplifying has been a big theme. I'm wondering if there are times when would-be allies could get involved in some community work, but end up sort of changing or co-opting the work being done in a way that's less positive potentially. And what do you folks think about that idea, or have you had experiences with that? I'm hesitant to call on someone because it's a fairly specific question.
Let's call Naoma.
Okay.
Go for it, Naoma.
So sorry if I understand the question correctly. Are you saying that what are some ways that allies have? Sorry, could you repeat the question again?
No problem. So in an effort to maybe amplify voices, is it possible as a pitfall for allies to end up co-opting a conversation or centering their own experience inappropriately?
Yeah, definitely. I think that brings us back to my point of centering other voices, because some people have every right if that's the right word, to add their voices to the conversations, even if they're not marginalized. So take, for example, a white woman who has a child with a black man and has a black baby. So, in that situation, you can't really tell her to not say anything because the child is black. But, yes, we do run a danger of co-opting the conversation when you're trying to say, oh, I was in the car with my friend and they pulled him over. I can't imagine what black people go through. Like, we already know this, you know what I mean? So how about you, like I said, look for other voices and then share those voices. You don't need to comment on you don't need to comment on everything, especially when the topic is really sensitive. Like no one, I think another thing is that some people, I think white people are usually afraid to add their voices to conversation, maybe because they don't want to co-opt the conversation or whatever. But I think that if you say this person, if you find another experience, put it out there, you might be more authoritative amongst your circle to say, okay, this is what has happened to another person from their own lens, than if that other person came to your circle to say something. So I think that it's very important to center voices and then have conversations amongst your circle and say, this is the experience that other people are experiencing, XYZ. And I think that will be the best way to not co-opt the conversation, because these voices are important. Unfortunately, for some of us, our voices are not strong enough without other voices, hence the allyship. So we do need, white allies, but it's just about centering other people's voices.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. And I'm talking from the lens of like racial allyship.
For sure.
Yeah, absolutely. It's you said so much, Naomi. It's just we're just sitting here and trying to reflect on all of what you're saying. The answer is so rich. So I really do appreciate how you present your answer to that question. And Stephanie, I don't know. I'll allow you to call the next person. You hesitated just now.
Well, maybe folks have had an opportunity to hear Noma's answer and think about it for themselves. So maybe, August, did you want to add anything to that?
Yes, I do see this a lot. I know I talk more about my disability experience than anything, and that's just because I interact with the world as a disabled person in a lot different way than I do as a trans person or as a queer person. And not just because the environment itself is a hazard. But I find this a lot because in disability, there is a little bit of separation because there's the mental and the physical. And a lot of times there'll be a conversation where I'm like, okay, I fit in that too, but it'll be separated where people be like, no, we don't mean you. You only walk weird. And it's a lot of like, it turns negative even though you're talking about your personal experience, because there's people that aren't being allies within their own community. So I feel like a big part of being an ally without turning it negative is to remember that it's not little groups, it's one big group. Everyone's experience is equal. And I also see this a lot with outside allies, because I have a friend who had a situation where it was just them talking about their experience and it got turned into a way to attack somebody. Not by my friend, by somebody else. So a big issue is to make sure that you are not using somebody's experience to attack an outsider.
Very well put there, August. And I do, you said you're centering a lot of the conversation around disability, your disability, or that identity. This is key to our conversation, and I like the fact that you're identifying the identity that you're bringing to the table. That is key. It provides a better explanation of what you're saying or talking about. So keep doing it. We do appreciate that. So I guess it's just for Alyssa to answer the next question. We don't have a choice now. Let's look.
I definitely think that this is the case in some situations. And I think that positionality is very important, and to recognize kind of where you stand within that, but also to think about the voices that systemically are missed or overlooked. And so within the context of my own identity, where I have mixed ancestry, I'm afforded particular privileges within that. And acknowledging my privileges doesn't take away from my indigeneity, but it allows me to operate as an ally within my sphere as well. And so to recognize the different levels of experiences, and again, amplifying those that are most silenced. So again, in my specific situation, I didn't grow up within my community, and I am quite white passing, I would say, compared to many other folks. And so my experiences are reflective of that situation. And so when I'm thinking about operating within certain spaces, I am thinking about amplifying those voices of those that, again, are systemically like looked over or silenced more often. And so I think it's important for everybody to be able to understand their identities and dissect that a little bit, and where they stand within situations.
Thanks so much, Alyssa. And I'll open this question to anyone. I don't know what it will be like necessarily in your circle, but once someone is identified as an effective ally, they may be called upon again and again. Is there something like ally burnout, or is there anything like that? Do you know of that? And what does it look like? I just want us to, in answering that question, just help us to understand when that relationship should end, if at all. Naoma mentioned at the beginning, earlier on, that allyship it's not a 9-to-5 job, which makes a lot of sense. So in answering this next question, is there burnout? And when should they end? Maybe as opposed to leaving it for anyone to answer, I'll call on August to start us off.
I think there is burnout, but I don't think it's allyship based. Because like I was talking about earlier with how often people will weaponize our experiences or weaponize our issues, is it will be like, if you talk about anything else, then you're not an ally, then you're bad, which is wrong, completely wrong to do that. And I think that's where the burnout comes, because it starts turning into like, well, if I don't do this, people will hate me. But then, and it comes back to the people it's about, like the actual people experiencing these issues, because it turns into burnout for them as well, because they're sitting there like, well, now my issues are being burdensome. And it's not a matter of the ally and the person they're advocating for. It's a matter of who's the one weaponizing it. They're causing the burnout, in my experiences.
Thanks, August. Alyssa, can you jump in on that one? Do you agree?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree with what August is saying about how burnout certainly exists, but whether it's specific to allyship, I'm not certain on that one, because yeah, at the end of the day, allyship is synonymous with relationship. Allyship is a relationship, and so you can set boundaries within that as well. But what August is saying as well about that makes people that are actually experiencing this feel burdensome about their lived experience, which they have no control over. And so I think it's important to draw boundaries where you need to, and yeah, to recognize that it is a marathon and not a sprint. So there's so many ways that allyship looks like. So at times, if that's not a physical presence, or you helping to showing up as a physical body for community events or whatever that looks like, that can be you supporting friends, that can be you lending an ear, that can be you lending your time or other resources in whatever way that looks like. But you don't have to be going at level 100 consistently, because it's just showing up, and it's showing up in imperfect ways. But I think showing up is half the battle. So meeting yourself where you're at, and being real with that while setting reasonable boundaries, I think is important. You know, burnout isn't beneficial to anybody. So I think it's important to rectify that, but to dig a little deeper in where that comes from, and then to think about alternative ways that you can support that are within your means.
Thanks, Alyssa. You said a few things there that I think we can ask Naoma to explain, and she'll be ready to explain very shortly. Allyship as a relationship. And when we think of this relationship, as you've put it, it sounds like a long-term relationship. Burnout usually comes when people or the partner just tries to put their all at the beginning, and then there's nothing left to continue this relationship. As you've mentioned, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So Naoma, what then would cause a would-be ally to want to join this relationship if they assume I'm going in this for life? And, you know, really, they just wanted to come and do a march in the Black Lives Matter movement. Let's take, for instance, a high school student. They just want to do this so that they can have their community grade checked off, community contribution checked off, and then that's it. So how do we encourage folks to become ally without that fear of this long-term relationship?
Okay, so while everyone was talking, one of the things that I remember, I can't remember the person, but essentially, if your allyship is going to cause burnout, and you're able to step away from the situation and say, you know, this is too much for me right now, I can't do this right now, it's a privilege, because what essentially it means is that you can just switch off when you're tired, but the person in the situation cannot switch off. So I think the first thing we need to recognize is that burnout is a privilege, and you get to leave when you can, when you want to, whilst the people, me in the situation that is intersection, like that is a Black woman, that is Black and a woman at that intersectionality, I don't get to leave. I always show up as a Black woman. There's nothing I can ever do about that, right? So I think that's the first thing. But I also think, like, it is true that it's a relationship and you do need to create boundaries. And sometimes even watching the situation can be traumatizing for the individual. So I think that you could take advantage of your privilege and just say, you know what, today I'm going to take a break. I'm not going to look at any social media. I'm just going to take care of myself, because we all need to take care of ourselves in order for us to be able to show up as our best selves. So I think that maybe if you recognize that the people in the situation cannot just walk away, but you that can walk away, maybe take a break and then come back. Don't overthink it. Like, take it one step at a time. If you volunteer for organizations, maybe give money to organizations here and there, like donate. Those are some ways that you can. There are other ways to be an ally. You don't always have to absorb the trauma. You can also donate. You can volunteer. So those are some of the ways that I think that you can be an ally and deal with the burnout.
Well put, Naoma. And I wrote down the one word that you mentioned at the beginning, privilege. You don't get to walk away. If you're able to walk away from this when you want to, you're actually moving with your privilege. The people who are affected day in, day out don't have that privilege to do so. So thank you for mentioning that. Alyssa, I'll jump back to you on this. A similar question to what I just asked Naoma. I just want to get a sense of what you think, or what can we say or do to motivate allies, given that we've just had this discussion about allies, relationship commitment, and, you know, their burnout and all those kinds of things. What do you say to a would-be ally to help them to become involved and to better understand what this relationship, air quotes, is all about?
Yeah, definitely. I think that I would say humility has such a big role in allyship. It requires humility, and humility requires courage, you know? And so I mentioned this before, but I'll build on it, how I think a lot of the time as human beings, we freeze. We're paralyzed by fear or shame of misstepping, or being tone deaf or what have you. And so that immobilizes us, which means that we're complicit. We're not helping the situation by any means. And so if you can allow yourself to show up and meet yourself where you're at, I think that goes a really long way, because it requires humility to be able to right your wrongs. And so if you do misstep, which you will, because we're human beings, how are you going to right that wrong? And in those moments, when you sit with it, and you sit with it from a place of love, for yourself and for others, it's a lot easier to move through that and then actually be able to show up. But like big emphasis on showing up as you are, where you're at, instead of trying to be perfect. And so I've experienced this a lot at the Indigenous Student Center at the Mount. There are really wonderful people that come in and want to engage in conversations. They want to help. They want to learn. And at first, there seems to be a bit of a pattern that I notice of like reservation. And there's this big fear of misstepping, and it actually inhibits and prevents you from having authentic conversations where you're learning and growing and being a support. And so I really do think that, sit with those feelings and really examine, where they come up, in what situations they come up, where you feel it in your body, and listen and figure out what those answers are. But that takes a lot of humility and courage to be able to do that. And it's a muscle. And so the more that you're in those situations, the more that you grow. So we grow the most through uncomfortable times. Yes.
Thanks so much, Alyssa. You used well, you didn't use the actual phrase, but you said something that I will now pose to August. You talked about the imposter syndrome, which is, you're showing up and you feel out of place, and that really does affect how the ally contributes to the cause. So in answering that question, August, I want you to consider as well that allies could work with you, for you, or on behalf of you or your group. So tell us then, August, how do you know if allies are working effectively?
I definitely think I'm a little lenient when it comes to allies, and it's if you're showing up and you're trying, you are doing your job. It's the thing is with me is it's not a matter of like you don't need a response from like Trudeau advocating for something. If you do the work, I acknowledge that, I appreciate it, it's proper allyship. So it's not a matter of like there's different steps you have to do. It's you do something, you're doing good. And because for my stuff with disability, with trans, with queer, every little bit helps. Because you're not gonna go out and like cure my disability. You're gonna do little things, like you're gonna put in a ramp somewhere. You're gonna advocate for proper research. You're gonna let people know about various disabilities. You're gonna change the terms you use, because there's so many terms nowadays people use that are used incorrectly. It's just a matter of, if you are trying even a little bit, it's good.
Thank you so much. Nilma, can you jump in and answer that same question? You want me to repeat the question?
Yeah, that would be great.
All right, no worries. So I said that allies could work with you, for you, or on behalf of you or the group that you're with. And Alyssa brought up this idea or this concept of imposter syndrome. So we want to know, how do you know if allies are working effectively in whatever project or whatever identities you might hold?
I think it's not a straightforward question because there's no way to actually measure effectiveness in allyship. But like August said, some of the things is, did you like, what are the outcomes of your actions? Like they said that you could, if some of your actions have caused, for example, a ramp to be built somewhere, then you've been an effective ally. But not everybody can do work to that certain level of accomplishment. So like they said at the beginning of the podcast, like you have to work within your own ability. So what is it that you can do that will make a difference in someone's life? Do you march? Do you donate money? Do you speak up in your own social circles? Those are the ways that you can be an ally, because like we say, I don't know if this is a saying in Canada, but we say it in Nigeria, like charity begins at home. So what are some of the things that you're doing within your own circle that is making a difference? Are you a safe space for people to pass derogatory comments, to start things like that? So those are some of the ways that I think you can be an ally, without feeling like you're an imposter. Like I don't allow, for example, people to use derogatory terms around me. I tell them like, that word is not okay, you can't say that, it's not okay. So I feel like whether or not the person that is being marginalized is present, it's always a safe space around me. So that's kind of one of the ways that I think you can be an ally without feeling like an imposter, because it is very possible to feel like an imposter. Like, should I even be saying this? Should I even be, I don't belong to that group. But I think that if you just learn, like we have talked about at the beginning, boundaries, then, you can be an effective ally.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. Alyssa, do you want to add anything to that?
I think that you guys both summed it up pretty well. I don't have too much to add.
All right.
Okay, great. I guess following up on this sort of theme of imposter syndrome. So I work in non-profit food and seed security. And one of the books that is making the rounds in my world is called Farming While Black. It's written by a Black farmer in the United States. Her name is Leah Penniman. And part of what she writes in that book is that embracing one's own cultural heritage is part of uprooting racism. And I think, we could expand cultural heritage to be, as you guys have said, like personal identity or personal positionality, in relation to any group or issue. We could replace racism with discrimination more broadly.
Yeah.
And what it makes me wonder is, what do you think the role of that personal investigation or that personal interrogation of your positionality looks like? What does that personal work look like, do you think, for allies?
Yeah, I really do think that it's just recognizing your own privilege. That's really what it boils down to. Like, for me, I was born and raised in Nigeria, and I grew up, in Nigeria. Nigeria is, if it's not the poverty capital of the world already, it's slowly becoming the poverty capital of the world. But I didn't grow up in poverty. Recognizing that there is a privilege there for my parents to be able to pay international fees for me and for my siblings to come to Canada. That's just one of the things that I grew up with, recognizing my privilege. So I think that if I now went out and I wanted to advocate for poorer Nigerians, I will be coming from a place of, I recognize my privilege, but my voice is very important in the conversation because XYZ. So I think that the first step is to recognize your privilege. Privilege does not mean that bad things don't happen to you or that you have it necessarily easier, but is anybody discounting you when you show up as yourself? That's one of the things that you need to think about. And the answer is typically no if you're a white male, first of all, white woman, second of all, you know. So once you start to recognize your privilege, then you can then start from there and say, okay, I recognize my privilege, but I still want to be an ally. To be difficult, there will be pushback. People are going to question whether or not I belong in this space, but I've done the work, I've done the research, and I do want to be here. And you know, if you show up like that, people will understand, and there will be spaces where you'll be accepted. And if you're not accepted in a space, then maybe find another space, because you know we do have rights to decide who we want in our spaces and who we don't want in the spaces, right? So it's not necessarily that you have to be accepted in every space. It's very difficult for people that are marginalized to accept everybody all the time in certain spaces. Some spaces are sacred and they want to keep it like that, you know? So it's just about doing the work, recognizing your privilege, and then showing up in the spaces where you've been invited or you're being accepted in.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Alyssa, would you want to add anything to that response?
Yeah, definitely. I think that identity work is a lifelong endeavor, and it's messy because we're human beings and we all have a particular context. And so whenever I was speaking earlier about a little bit about imposter syndrome without actually naming it, I also think a lot about our nervous systems, and I think about trauma living inside the body and how that dictates our actions and the way that we show up, like our knee-jerk reactions kind of thing. And so when we notice ourselves getting uncomfortable in particular situations, like to examine the why. And so I think that comes from a very place-based context. And so the norms and the narratives that are associated with that, and that of our parents and that of our grandparents and our great-grandparents and our ancestors, that all plays such an incredible role in really subtle ways, I think. And so to be able to use your body as a compass, as a starting point for that, I think is really important. Because we may know something on a cognitive level, but our body is saying and communicating to us in a completely different language. That's perhaps opposing with that cognitive belief. And so, yeah, to really sit and think about that, and think about the narratives and the history and the place of where this originated from. And then to be able to move through the emotions that come with that, and to move through, again, like the fear or the shame or whatever ways that looks like, to be able to better understand your identity and your positionality within that of a group of people or a cause or what have you. But I think that it requires a ton of introspection, and not just on our lived experiences, but that of our family units, like of our ancestors, because it plays an incredible role in the way that we operate.
Thanks so much, Alyssa. August, did you want to add anything to that, or should we move on to this final question?
Yes, I actually do have something now. It just took a little bit of time for me to understand exactly what I needed. The big thing, it's like you need to recognize everything. You need to acknowledge your unconscious biases. Because truth be told, with the way that the society and like the world is set up right now, it's set up in a way to be like, okay, we are this, this, and this. And some people do comment on things. And it's the little things that you don't think, it could be offensive or it could be mean, that you don't think of, and you have to almost look at your own stuff and be like, okay, what have I said that was wrong? What have I said that's ableist? What have I said that's transphobic? What have I reacted to that was transphobic? Like, for example, I do look at a lot of different like comics. I love Aside Male at Birth comics. And one of them is saying, like, every time you laugh at a man in a dress, a trans girl finds it hard to come out. And I feel like that's so important because you have to look at yourself and be like, okay, have I responded to something and not said something? So it's really holding accountability for your own actions, whether you meant to or not. Because in this, while your intentions matter, how it affects somebody else also matters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks so much, August. That was worth the wait. I just want to take a minute and really appreciate your responses to that. Like my takeaway in terms of thinking about my body as a compass, as Alyssa said, or my body as a knower, as a starting place for measuring and noticing my discomfort, as a starting place for personal reflection.
Yeah.
Super duper important. And then that reflection as being a piece of accountability, right? Regardless of what my intentions might have been, where have I acted or not acted, and where would I alter that course if I take a few minutes and just reflect, as a baseline.
Yeah.
And also, though we're a couple minutes past it, the humility in accepting that you might not be welcome in every space as an ally, as a would-be ally, just as a person who wants to engage, is so important, because that is fundamentally, I think, the humility that's required,
Yeah, I was going to add something similar to that, because wanting to be an ally is already a risky request or a risky endeavor, because you are going to approach a group of people. You don't necessarily know what the outcome would be, but I believe Alyssa said, or maybe it's August said earlier, having doing the research, knowing what to say and how to communicate and those kinds of things is key to building this relationship. So as I said, it's already a risk stepping out and wanting to participate or to become an ally. So I think now what we ought to be thinking of is, how do we better explain allyship to those would-be ally? You know what I mean? Because there are people out there who want to become an ally, but they're just fearful. Right? They just don't know how to approach, and many of them, they're just fearful. When they become an ally, they're fearful of saying the wrong thing. Right. I don't know if any of you want to jump in on that. Have you experienced any of that?
Yeah, no, I think that it's definitely a valid fear, because in today's world, we have such a very, in some situations, very toxic council culture. So we don't give people a lot of space to make some mistakes. I mean, some mistakes are just not acceptable, like blackface, but we don't give people a lot of space to make mistakes. So I can definitely see why people will be reluctant to become allies. But then if you do the work, so do research, if you Google how to become an ally, so many things pop up. And you can start there. How do I become an ally? You can make disclaimers on your post, like, I'm still learning, I'm still trying to understand the situation. So, you can just really start again by centering other people's voices. You can start there, do the research, and then start by centering other people's voices. And then, over time, you would learn what is appropriate and isn't appropriate to say. And I think that's really how you begin. So it's not really an excuse to say, oh, I'm scared that I'm going to say the wrong thing. Everyone says the wrong thing once in a while, but have you done the research? Have you spoken to other people that are already allies? Like, what have you done to take practical steps towards becoming an ally?
Thanks so much, Neela. So this is our final question. And maybe I'll ask August to start with this one, and then Alyssa, and then Naomi could end that with her answer. What is the value of people with privilege working in your own circle? Now, I want you to consider those with privilege as allies, and what is the value of those privilege being added to the work that you're doing?
So it does bring me a lot to something we actually talked about in my poli-sci class last term. It was welfare social policy. No, sorry, women's social policy in the welfare state. That's what it was called. And it was how advocacy on the inside and the outside and how they go. And it's when you're on the outside, you have less to lose. And it's because like you aren't at risk of like losing something. You're not at risk of being as injured. But it's when it's like that, you're not always taken seriously, which is where I think the privilege comes in. Because even though you're on the outside, you are technically on the inside of a different circle. And the way it goes, there is a hierarchy, which there shouldn't be, of who is listened to. And while you have nothing to lose, you are listened to. So even if you're wrong, people are going to listen to you. And that's why I think the people of privilege need to be listening to the inside circle to kind of balance that scale out. So when there's the balance there, it's the right information said by the people who are being listened to. So in a way, it's here's your figurehead, but the message is the people that need to be listened to.
Well said. Thank you. And Alyssa, you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, what an awesome course. I would have loved to take that. But yeah, I think that it's necessary. So to build on what August is saying, I think that it's necessary to have people that have privilege working as allies from many perspectives. But I think also from a fatigue perspective as well. And so I think in academic situations, well, and not even just academic situations, I'm speaking from my personal experience, but there's a certain kind of fatigue for being kind of pulled in many different directions while still understanding your identity and your needs and your boundaries and kind of finding the sweet spot within that. And so to have people on your side that come from a place of privilege that can keep up momentum, so to speak, and can amplify the voices of people that are continually doing the work, which is exhausting. I think it helps in those aspects. And like I said before, in terms of my definition of allyship, I think, fundamentally it's being rooted in having an understanding that every human being deserves to live, love, and operate in the world equally. And we can't do that without amplification, without supports. And then to recognize that, there's very real differences and nuances from case to case, but at the end of the day, like oppression and discrimination, it's the same root, but different flavors, I think. And so to be able to unite in those ways is necessary in moving forward. And I think that would be impossible without the work of allies and, what it means to truly be in community with people. I hope that made sense.
Oh, absolutely. It was very much steeped in philosophy and all those kinds of deep thinking subjects. I really enjoyed that piece. Nilma, can you add to that before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think that ally voices are very important because, like I had said it earlier, what it does is that it gives an authoritative voice to your social circle. So there are people that I definitely can never reach, no matter how passionate I am, no matter how many facts and figures I provide. There are certain people I can never reach, but then if they heard it from their own social circle, which is a more authoritative and more trusted voice, then it adds value to that conversation. It makes them stop and think, maybe even for a second, to say, maybe there is some value in what this person is saying. So I really think that it is very important that we have as many voices added to this conversation as possible, because again, it adds authority to the conversation and it adds a bit of trust as well to that conversation.
Thanks so much, Norma. I feel like we can go on and on talking about this topic. What do you think, Stephanie?
We're good. Another 2 hours?
Oh my gosh, this has been really rich, and I just want to remind you that you're under the Baobab tree. I have here with me Stephanie, my co-host, and the panels, Norma, August and Alyssa, and they have been a wealth of information. And I really do appreciate the knowledge that you've brought to this circle. And I know the audience will definitely appreciate the information you've shared with us. Today, we are at the end of this podcast right now. And I hope that those who are listening, that you would have learned something from our discussion. And I don't even have all of the points that were listed. They were too much for me to mention right now, but there are many opportunities on campus to become an ally, and there are countless teachers on campus to tell you how to become an ally. And here at MSVU, we are always open to this social activism and making this a major difference in our community. I think this is probably synonymous with the name MSVU. So I want to thank our listeners and also thank all of those who have participated on this podcast.